I personally, when I'm scrolling through, say, Instagram or TikTok, I never learn anything.
Hmm.
I'll go through it and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Or I'll see a meme and I'll laugh. And I think that social media might be able to bring awareness, like, oh, cool, they came up with this new technology, and it might be able to reverse some of the negative impact that there has been caused in the past couple years. But I think it's not going to solve it.
Hmm.
I think that it's something that needs to be taught in schools on a national level. It's something that needs to be understood by every American, and I think that not even American, everybody in the world.
Hmm.
And I think social media may be a good tool, but in the long run, I don't think it'll fully educate people.
Hmm. Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brendan Black, and today's episode is all about the relationship between social media and agriculture. This is another episode of our mini series we've been focusing on, talking about the relationship between agriculture and urbanization. And in this one, we're going to kind of talk about how social media may have played a role in just how agriculture and urban development have kind of strayed away from each other. So with me to talk about this topic is Matt, the host of the Dumbology podcast. I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself. So go ahead, Matt.
Hey, what up, guys? Like he said, I'm Matt from Dumbology. New comedy podcast that kind of just launched in the past couple of weeks. Really excited to be here, and yeah, let's see how I do.
Awesome. So, like I was mentioning earlier, this entire conversation is going to be mostly focused on social media, kind of where it came from, what it's been doing lately. I'm sure, as everyone who's listening to this knows, it is one of the most one of the most powerful forces that's occurring in the world right now.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of wanted to explore a little bit about the history of social media with agriculture. It's something that's kind of more recent. Agriculture really hasn't been in social media very long. So I wanted to talk about why that is and kind of what I think social media has done to the relationship between people and their food, and kind of want to hear your perspective on all that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, sweet. So I think kind of the best place to start here is just to lay out what my theory is, and then I'll have you tell me what you think about it.
Yeah. Of course.
All right. So what I'm claiming here, what my proposal is that as we covered in former episodes along this timeline, is that in the early 1900s, agriculture began to see a sudden shift away from urban development. As the Industrial Revolution began to set into place, as people began to adapt jobs that were off the farm, and as cities began to expand and sprawl, as we got through both world wars, and a lot of industries started focusing a lot more on mass production as opposed to looking at the farming side of things. We just saw this sudden shift in attention away from how food was produced and more into how technology and products came to be. As that developed over time, obviously we went through several wars and cultural changes and revolutions and all this sort of thing. And fast forward to today, we're living in a society where people are very unaware of where their food comes from. I mean, in general, most people know it comes from a farm. There's actually quite a few who don't even know that really. But even those who know it comes from a farm don't know exactly how it gets from the farm to the restaurant, to the grocery store, to their plate. There's a lot of middle step process that kind of gets left out of the equation. And my theory has been that the reason that this has been happening is because, for one, like I mentioned, there's been a cultural and societal shift over the course of the last century. But not just that, there's also been, within the past probably 10, 20 years, actually more than that now because we're in 2021, it's been probably about 30 years ish since the introduction of the internet and newer technologies like cell phones, social media, like a lot of newer technologies that kind of distract our attention away from the real world. We're seeing an even larger schism between those two entities. So not only is agriculture being left out of the equation, it's being left out of education, in social media, it's either talked about in kind of like the, oh yeah, it's a cute little hobby farm, or it's being completely bashed by different organizations like, some animal rights activists, or those who are preaching different lifestyles or different dietary restrictions, that sort of thing. That seems to be the only conversations that we're having today about agriculture, about food production, or about anything along that line of lifestyle. So more recently, we're beginning to see, and when I say recently, I mean like probably past 3 to 5 years, we're beginning to see some level of reintroduction of agriculture into mainstream conversations, but it's very small and it's growing, but not nearly at the rate that I think it's going to be to be able to remain relevant. It's going to take some time for us to get agriculture back into the equation. And that's actually part of the reason why there's been a revolution of agricultural podcasts recently. Like back when I started my podcast 3 years ago, there were absolutely no agricultural podcasts. Like there were a few, but they were mostly industry based. They were by farmers for farmers kind of thing. There were very, very few. They're interested in actually trying to get the information to the public about what's going on the farm and answering questions that they have about agriculture. I was actually one of the first. Now there's tons of them. I mean, like, probably over 100 different podcasts, all dedicated to educating people about farmers, about the struggles they go through, about the technology that's being used in the industry, about their food, where it comes from, all of that stuff, which is great. But we're a little late to the game. Now our reputation has been a bit harsh because of social media spreading information that's not entirely accurate, either in one way or the other, bashing agriculture or trying to support it, but not spreading accurate ways of representing that industry. And now we're starting to see the negative ramifications of it. So that's kind of my theory as it stands, that social media initially really hurt agriculture because it was, agriculture wasn't part of the equation for so long. And now that we're finally getting in there, it's not quite enough just yet, but it can be the tool to kind of bring that relationship back together. So just off of that alone, what are your thoughts?
Well, for you and your listeners to know, I am extremely anti-establishment.
Mm,
So I think that there was a reason that there wasn't a microscope under where our food was coming from,
mm,
because these huge corporations, McDonald's, these food stores, Kellogg's, they don't want you to know where their food's coming from, because then there's more regulation on it. There's more questions of what you're putting into my food, how you're making it last longer, and you lose money in that in the long run because you have to regulate your food. So I think that there was kind of a purposeful tactic in play there, especially on the capitalist side of it. So it's just we're okay with it not knowing where it comes from. We're okay not knowing the middle part because it saves us money. We can give you great seafood and you'll pay us $4 for it and no one asks where it came from.
mm.
And I think social media like TikTok, which has billions of people on it, you're starting to see more. I see farm TikToks all the time
Mhm.
because, and I think they're hilarious because they're either just messing around on the farm or they're showing you how it's done. And I think that's a good thing, but I don't think it's as paid attention to as much as it needs to be, if you know
Mm.
what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have actually started a TikTok in and of myself for this podcast dedicated to kind of
Yep.
mini lessons in different agricultural industries.
Yep.
I've made friends with other TikTokers who do something similar. They're dairymen or they're beef ranchers or they're cotton growers or whatever, and they kind of focus on different aspects of their industry. And like you said, they have very good information, but it often gets overlooked because, oh, the cute cows, or oh, the that's a
Yep.
really cool looking plant, but they don't, not everyone synthesizes the information like they really should. And don't get me wrong, there has been quite a bit of positive interaction in my comment section and with some of the other communities, but there's also quite a bit of it getting overlooked in the parts where it matters. Like they'll understand the information on a conceptual level, but once they begin to realize how that impacts their food, it seems to either go over their head or they ignore the information. And
Yeah.
I think that, to your point, there is a certain level of of companies that are trying to mitigate um, some of the information about that process because they fear that people aren't going to understand it, or because they're not going to support it, and therefore it'll drive down prices. That's definitely a part of it. I mean, there are even farmers who are concerned about that. They won't let people see their farms because they're worried they're just going to regulate them into the ground.
Yep.
One of the challenges that we've been seeing, though, in the opposite effect, is that because people haven't been seeing farms, they've been voting on regulations that are actually hurting farmers because they don't realize what that's actually doing to the farm. And that's been a new approach from the agricultural education side of things, is trying to make some of these regulations aware to people of, if you're voting on this, this is what this is going to do. If you vote on a regulation that's going to make it so farmers have to follow these certain criteria, that's going to make their operation a lot harder to manage. They're not going to be able to raise as many of this type of animal, or grow as many of this type of crop, which is going to raise the price of your product, which is, there's a whole chain of events that goes into it. And oftentimes those regulations are passed in terms of what those people consider either ethical or logical, conclusions that are that make the most sense to them. But when you actually kind of, lay out the operation and why it's functioning the way it's functioning, if you start to throw regulations in there that cause you to completely restructure it, then you're starting to degrade the quality of which that product can be without, a massive, basically redesign of the industry, which as sometimes is entirely necessary. I mean, Temple Grandin did a whole, a whole string of work in the slaughterhouse industry that actually overall benefited the industry and did cause a redesign of it, which it was overall a benefit, like I mentioned, but it does cause a certain level of concern for those who work in the industry, because redesigning the industry means that they're not only going to lose money, but oftentimes smaller operations are going to go out of business because they can't keep up.
Right.
So there's a conversation that needs to be had about, yes, it's understandable why we're keeping the information from people who, are consuming the product, but there's also a conversation that needs to be had about, if we keep it from them for too long, they're going to start voting on things they don't understand. That's going to hurt us in the long run. So you better be, informing them of what's going on and why their decisions matter.
Yeah, I actually completely agree. But I think that in the past couple of years, especially to my knowledge, as a person who doesn't follow this industry as closely, and someone who doesn't work in the industry, I think the things that I'm seeing are mostly negative. There's a lot of questions about sustainability with these farms and how we can change it so that it benefits us in the long run, and there's no over harvesting or destroying of lands or pollution from cattle. And it's just how much of this information is false, and how much is that conveyed through social media, and how much of it is true, and how much of it can benefit us in the long run. So I think it's a double-edged sword that we're talking about here, so
Mhm.
I think that uh, the again, I'm just so anti-establishment. I just don't think that the regulations will ever be beneficial to anybody in the smaller side of the industry. Congress is never going to pass a bill that will benefit small farmers, but there are things that need to change about it,
Mhm.
and they're always going to push towards making it bigger and making it make more money and produce more for less. And it's just how much of that negatively impacts the earth and the industry and individuals.
Right. No, I
So,
think you definitely have a solid point, and it's something that I have been kind of exploring over the past few years now, having that conversation about how to properly balance, regulation with the conversation about, conservation and overall environmental friendliness, and still having a productive, agricultural facility. Because, by the day, we're seeing countries that are beginning to become less and less capable of growing their own food, and they're relying more and more on imports, which is going to cause other countries to have to produce more. And we just, population is going to keep going up until about
yep,
2050, and then it's going to plateau and go back down. But until then, we're have to keep producing food in some manner that's still sustainable, but also can keep up its productivity. And when we start to have conversations about, environmental friendliness in relation to productive level and productive quality, we begin to see some gray areas that are definitely difficult to discern. I mean, like you mentioned, the regulations, as regulations get passed, smaller operations are not going to be able to remain as viable for as long, which I think is kind of a shame, because a lot of people who support agriculture support the smaller farmers.
yep,
Well, you really can't pass regulations that are going to benefit the smaller farmers, as you mentioned, or if you do, it's really difficult to get them to work on a large scale. If you pass those regulations, you're hurting the small farmers. But if you want to support the small farmers, you need to be careful about the regulations. It's no matter what, you're going to be hurting somebody in the process. But I think that the part that gets left out of the conversation most of all, and especially this is in regards to social media and kind of education and those overall conversations, is that we haven't been having proper conversations about what's been happening in agriculture for so long that people seem to have this kind of corrupted idea of what a farm actually looks like today. I mean, people have this idea that agriculture is very, just one guy with his cornfield and his cow, and he milks his cow every day by hand. And, it's very, like prehistoric almost in terms of agricultural technology. I mean, we have technology today that can convert the environmental damage that cows cause into an energy source and actually reduce it by such a degree that's never even been possible before. We're genetically engineering crops that way they reduce the amount of carbon in the air and put it back into the soil to try to rejuvenate its life. I mean, we're developing technology and science that's so far advanced that a ton of technology based industries haven't even come across that yet. And not only that, we're finding sustainable methods of maintaining our relationship with the earth and also producing a high quality and high productivity product that is it's kind of unbelievable how fast we come along this far. But because of our lack of agricultural literacy as a society, and because we're leaving that out of the conversation in social media, that kind of stuff gets left out of the equation. So we regulate, the industry until it's in the ground, but by doing those regulations, we're hurting the ability for us to experiment and find new technologies that are in the long run going to be more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, more productive, more, higher quality. And it's just it's one of those things I think, and this is actually something I have a complaint about the agriculture industry, that I think that we don't do a good enough job of telling people what we're working on and what's going on behind the scenes. Like we're working on all these technologies, all these biomechanics, all of this, science that can in the long run help a lot of things. The environment people are worried about, the products to feed the world, and high enough quality to make sure we don't all get sick and die. And we're not telling anybody about it. So everyone looks at us and says, oh, well, they're poisoning the earth. It's like, well, that's easy to assume. We don't realize why we're doing what we're doing when it's actually in the long run going to benefit everybody. And that at the end of the day, that's kind of the moral of the story, is that the communication needs to be improved in some way. And I think social media is a good tool for that, but it might not be the only tool that we can use.
I think I personally, when I'm scrolling through, say, Instagram or TikTok, I never learn anything.
Hmm.
I'll go through it and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Or I'll see a meme and I'll laugh. And I think that social media might be able to bring awareness, like, oh, cool, they came up with this new technology, and it might be able to reverse some of the negative impact that there has been caused in the past couple years. But I think it's not going to solve it,
Hmm.
I think that it's something that needs to be taught in schools on a national level. It's something that needs to be understood by every American, and I think that not even American, everybody in the world.
Hmm.
And I think social media may be a good tool, but in the long run, I don't think it'll fully educate people.
Hmm. No, I completely agree with you, and that's something that I have been advocating for even longer than I've been doing the podcast, is that we need to get agriculture more heavily integrated into public school systems.
Yeah.
It's something that is in rural areas is actually very common in school systems. There's a youth leadership organization called FFA that a lot of high schoolers partake in, that's it's very based on teaching them leadership skills, but it grounds it in agricultural lessons, so kids understand how to speak, how to conduct themselves in a job interview, how to network, how to do all these things, but they learn it by working on the farm and by committing themselves to agricultural industry based activities that teach them about where their food comes from and how to teach others that information. That kind of stuff could be largely effective on a massive scale if we just integrated it more deeply into our curriculum. But that's something it's a lot harder to do on a short term basis. So I think that probably the part where I misspoke is not necessarily that we need to be using social media as the tool to fix this problem, but it might be the best place to start the conversation about how we get this more heavily integrated.
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, for sure.
yeah, because I think that like you said, there aren't many people who look to social media for their education. Actually, I shouldn't say that. There are people who look to TikTok and YouTube for their education, which it can help, but there's a certain level of it that needs to be associated with the things that they're exposed to on a daily basis as well. I think that to your point, that social media, while it doesn't serve as an educational tool, it can serve the opposite purpose. I think that, as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, social media for the longest time before agriculture decided to join the mix was doing a very active job of degrading the image of agriculture. You had and activist organizations that were focused on spreading information about agriculture that was untrue. And there's a certain level of it that had truth to it, but that doesn't mean that it's a true statement. There needed to be a conversation to have there. But since agriculturalists weren't on social media at that time, there was no conversation to be had, and all of a sudden there was a massive group of people who all of a sudden were anti-agriculture.
Yeah.
I think that as we approach this new age of agriculture being part of social media, and we approach a new age of people being interested in agriculture, at least superficially, they like the idea of a sustainable farm, and they like the idea of growing their own food and all that sort of thing. We're going to begin to see a lot more support for the idea of having agriculture more deeply intricated into education, but I think it's still kind of a long road ahead. So I'm focusing more on where do we start the conversation and how do we get the most people on board with this as possible before we start to do any kind of infrastructure rearrangement.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that is the I think that's really the only way you could do it in today's day and age.
Mhm.
I mean, you can put articles in newspapers and make Netflix specials till you're blue in the face, but I think that on a day-to-day basis, especially connecting with the younger generation that will talk about it,
Mhm.
TikTok. TikTok. My little brother will talk about TikTok. So I'm like, how do you know about that? And I saw it on TikTok. Oh, okay. It's just it is incredible the information that it can spread.
Mhm.
And I think that it will get people talking, but I think there's a fine line there where you want something so desperately to be talked about. Well, then you have run into the problem of it becoming a trend. And
Right.
then when it's a trend, it's only going to matter for 3 months, and then it fizzles and fades out, and again we're back to square one.
Mhm.
So there's
Yeah.
social media is kind of a pain.
Mhm.
It'll hurt. It can hurt you just as much. Like
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very intricate thing, and I think that in the past 20 years since the internet has come around. Sorry, my cat's climbing all over me. She really wants some loving. Since it came around, we completely just put everything under a microscope and change how we view things, and it's just our attention span got a lot shorter.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
guess
I
is what I'm
agree.
trying to say.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on, as we're kind of talking about the introduction of social media here, you said it's been around for, 20-ish years. As social media has evolved, I have my own thoughts on the matter of social media and its role it plays in education. Do you think that social media is something that not only is here to stay, but is going to become a more integral part of the way we absorb information and of the way we have conversations, or is it going to kind of morph into something else?
It's kind of scary, the path I see it going on, because
Mhm.
I I'm only 23,
Mhm.
so I spent about half my life not on the internet, and I spent the other half on the internet.
Mhm.
And seeing my younger siblings who have spent their whole lives on the internet, it's I don't see it becoming a positive thing at all. I think it's going to do nothing but devolve and change the way we consume entertainment and media. And there's just I don't think there's anything good that's going to come out of it.
Yeah. No,
At all.
no, I think you have a solid point. I mean, I'm only a couple years younger than you. I'm 21, and I went through a similar path. I even grew up in a farm town where the internet was hardly even a relevant topic up until probably 5-10 years ago.
Yep.
And we since the introduction of internet in my small town, I mean, we had it growing up, obviously, but like not like today. Um, whenever it
Yeah.
got introduced, now all of a sudden, every youth leadership organization, every small community, every 4-H club, every fair, every everything was on the internet. They had a Facebook page. They were having conversations with people around the world, which can be a very good thing depending on how you use it.
Yes.
The
Uh,
internet Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's. I meant to say that I think it is a good tool.
Mhm.
Sorry, please continue.
No, absolutely. I think that, like you just mentioned, the internet has the potential to be an incredibly beneficial, thing, as long as we don't allow it to control us. If you use the internet for what you need it for instead of letting the internet use you, then it's a very good thing. But it depends, how often does that actually happen? How many people actually use it for something and then turn it off and go do something else?
I mean, I taught myself how to work on cars entirely on YouTube.
Mm,
So I think that if there is an interest, there is you can definitely get something beneficial out of it. But I think that the way we consume things is just getting worse and worse and worse. And it's just, and in 10 years, we're going to watch 3-second videos every 20 hours and just lay there like we're in Wall-E. And I
right.
just, I just, I don't see it becoming a positive thing, especially with the way that companies like Facebook and TikTok dominate how we consume media. Like
Well,
every new musical artist comes out through TikTok.
hmm.
Every single platform you use on your phone is through Facebook, and you start to think, well, you're at the mercy of the agenda of these people.
Hmm.
So these people don't say they don't care about agriculture. You're never going to see anything about agriculture. It's just you're putting the power in a couple of people's hands, and I think that it's a negative thing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's funny you bring up Wally. Actually, it's coming out after this episode, Will. So anyone who's listening to this, you're getting a preview. But we actually just recorded an episode of about Wally a couple
Nice.
days ago. So, and it still relates to this topic of how agriculture is getting separated from society and how it's kind of getting absorbed into this obsessive state where they forget about everything that's important and they just kind of focus on their own little reality.
Yeah, look at this. Listen to this song. Look at this girl dance. Just lay here. Who cares? Don't think. Uh,
Exactly.
can you tell
No,
I'm anti-establishment, dude? I got a
just a bit.
tinfoil hat on right now.
Well, you also mentioned an interesting point in that, if a certain company does not support a certain idea, you'll never see anything about it.
Yeah,
Um,
no.
we actually did an episode about this a few months ago with actually a dairyman TikToker friend of mine. Anyone who's listening knows, it's Steven, Dairy Muse. He's a fantastic TikToker. He's a dairy blogger that's been doing it for about 10 years. Great dude. But he actually he had to come on an episode and rant because he was getting tons of videos taken down and he was getting his blog taken down and all of this stuff because and it wasn't even anything that he had done. It was because certain groups, Facebook, Google, other groups along those lines were not supportive of agriculture, and so they were beginning to shut down certain things that he was posting and promote anti-agricultural content.
That's literally censorship.
Right, exactly.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's why we're doing such this big episode about it, talking about why this is happening and how this is a big issue and people need to be paying attention to it because we're doing our best to try to bring a mode of information to people about their food, about where it's coming from, about what's going into it, and they're saying no, we're gonna push this girl dancing instead. You don't need to have that. And they completely like it's one thing to get other videos more publicized than your own, but it's another thing to get your video taken down in response to something that you posted that wasn't even controversial.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous, and it's frustrating because there's nothing you can do.
Right.
I'm still gonna go on TikTok after this, and I'm
Hmm.
gonna watch Addison Rae dance because it's entertaining. It's just, it's crazy how the society we live in has evolved. Because up until maybe 160 years ago, we were all farmers, and then
Yep.
the Industrial Revolution happens, and now I work in an office for whatever reason, and it's just it's crazy that there are certain people that tell you how to think and how to feel and what to think about, and it's just uh,
No, I'm with you. I completely agree. I mean, and that's one of the biggest reasons that I'm doing this in the first place is the like you mentioned 160 years ago everyone was a farmer, or
yep,
at least everyone knew a farmer.
yeah.
Even 50, 60 years ago everyone knew a farmer, and that value has been lost. Less than 2% of Americans are directly involved in food production. you know Like,
Yeah.
it's just we're so disconnected from it that it's not even part of the conversation. And now us introducing it is not bringing people back to the idea of like, oh, we should probably be focusing on our food. It's more like, hey, look at the cute cows, which
Yeah.
I don't think it's a bad thing that people, have an appreciation for it in some regard. But the fact that they're not prioritizing the fact that this is literally their source of life is concerning to me.
Yeah.
It's something that I think that, we need to have kind of a conversation about the prioritization we have of certain content over others.
Well, you would think that on a basic human instinct, you would want to know where your food comes from.
Right. No,
You
I
would
would think so. I would hope so.
like you want to, but so many people go to McDonald's and they're like, all right, I'll put this questionable chicken in my body. Whatever.
Right.
Who cares where it came from? Who cares how it was manufactured? And it's just and all right, I'm
Well,
gonna
it's
start ranting.
well, it's an interesting topic because when I started my podcast back in 2018, I started with the intention of and like I mentioned earlier, I interviewed farmers for the first hour of or first hour for the first year of my podcast. And I had this great idea of like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna interview all these farmers, get all this information out there. I'm gonna address some of the most common misconceptions I see on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and we're gonna answer all these questions, and it'll be great. Not like the only people who listened to it were family, friends, people who lived in my immediate area. That was about it.
Yeah,
And I realized people don't look for information on that kind of stuff.
no,
And I started having conversations with people outside of my community. That's why I started finding like the Reddit communities and that sort of thing about 2 years into my project. And I began to realize people have an interest in it, but you have to go seek them out. You have to present the information right in front of them because it's not at the forefront of their mind. People don't wonder where their food comes from. If you tell them, they're like, oh, well, that's cool. I didn't know that. I'm glad I know that now. But it never even occurred to them beforehand.
yeah. That I think it's a lot of the emphasis on instant gratification our society puts on,
Mm,
and I think that it also has to do with the type of work that has been devalued in the past 30 years.
hmm.
Don't go to trade school, go to college, work in an office, make Jeff Bezos rich.
Right.
Don't work with your hands. Only stupid people work with their hands.
Hmm.
And that's something somebody literally told me. And it's just the fact I it almost feels like a smear campaign has been going on against this community and type of work that is so essential to our lives, to
Hmm.
keeping us alive. I'm gonna die if I don't eat, but
Right.
man, farmers are dumb, dude. That's ridiculous. And uh, uh just
No,
gonna
you're absolutely right. I mean, I've literally had people in the past. I've told them about all the technology and all the science and all the like the chemistry, biology, business management, leadership, environmental, management, all of the stuff that goes into agriculture. And I've had people in the past that literally, like you mentioned, they told me that they thought that farmers were just unintelligent, that they thought that they didn't go to college, that they have never studied anything before. They just kind of knew farming because that's what they grew up with. Like, yeah, a lot of farmers inherit farms through their family, but a hefty portion of at least new generation farmers have been to college. They have studied all of the technology, all the new growing methods, all the biology, chemistry, the environment. They have to be able to predict the weather and be mechanics and engineers and nurses and doctors and like all this different stuff all in one person. It's anyone who has to work with their hands, and that's not just farmers but anyone in that type of craft, linemen, pipe workers, plumbers, all that kind of stuff. They're incredibly impressive because it takes a certain level of understanding that a lot of people who just work on a computer all day just they don't have to worry about, because it's
yeah.
not right in front of them.
And I think to bring it back to the main point of the episode, I think you are correct in showing the more in-depth and scientific side of it can kind of shine a brighter light on it.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's just I feel like there are forces working against it,
Hmm.
that don't want it to be seen a certain way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And that's kind of that's the central point of this whole conversation is that, us in agriculture. I'm kind of at a distinct spot in agriculture because I have one foot on the farm and one foot in the city, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I grew up in a farm town, but I was I was raised in the city part of it. I went to a public school where there were some farm kids, but a lot of city kids. I literally am going to college in a very large city. It's something that is I'm kind of I've got both ends in me, but I have respect for both, and I think there's a conversation to be had about both. But it's one of those things that us that are involved in agriculture and are trying to speak for it, it's an uphill battle. Like you mentioned, there are definitely forces acting against the agricultural education sector of the internet, but we're trying everything we can, finding any approach we can to get that information out there for people to absorb and kind of play with. And it's just, it's a constant engagement of trying to find new and creative ways to get it out there. And it's
Yeah.
just sometimes it doesn't work, and then we got to scratch it off and go back to the drawing board. I mean, that's kind of what happens when you come to social media 10 years after it's already been going. It's just
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah. And yeah. I have nothing to add to that at all. There's no crazy conspiracy I could throw in there, guys.
It's just it's one of those things, and I don't mean to like this is something that always kind of happens whenever I get into kind of like a not necessarily a rant, but kind of like a long monologue about that sort of thing. I always feel like I'm prioritizing agriculture above anything else. Like, this is what we should be talking about all the time. It's not that agriculture it should be the one thing that everyone thinks about constantly, but it's something that it's so important that if we leave it out of the conversation long enough, it's not going to be there anymore. And for anyone who doesn't have agriculture, you kind of can't live. So it's important not because it's something I grew up with, or it's not important because it's something that doesn't get talked about. It's important because if we neglect it, we're going to not continue to have it, and if we don't have it, we can't survive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it would be an interesting statistic to do if you went to an average American household and said, "Do you know who Addison Rae is? Do you know how your food is brought to you?" And
Right.
I would like to see that percentage.
Oh man, I mean, there actually have been statistics shown on that sort of thing. Not obviously not that exact question, but
Oh,
I
it's got to
mean.
be Addison Rae, dude. I don't want anything else.
Well, I know that, I mean, this is a kind of an older statistic, but back in 2011, there were surveys done in grocery stores asking people if they knew where their food came from, kind of the origin of it before the store. And about 72% of people said they didn't know.
Yeah.
They didn't know they came from a farm. They didn't know that it was grown out of the ground. They just kind of thought that came from the back.
That's ridiculous. I hate the society we live in. Yeah, it came from the shelf. What do you mean, man?
Right.
Where else did it come from,
Well,
you
I
idiot?
mean, this not to bash on the customers, but like I work in a grocery store and I've had people, the grocery store I work in, we sell all because I go to an agricultural college. We sell
Yeah,
all the food that we grow at the college, and
that's pretty
so
cool.
it's really cool. I love working there. And we have customers come in that fully understand that that's kind of our program. And they're like, oh, well, why don't you guys have, grapes right now? It's like, well, because it's not grape season. Or they're like, oh, do you have any more peaches in the back? Because, we're out of peaches or whatever. I'm like, yes, we specifically have peaches in the back that we're not bringing out because we don't want you to have them. It's like, no, if we had peaches, we would be giving them to you, but they're not, we haven't harvested them yet. There's a seasonal, cycle that goes with this kind of stuff. It's not like Walmart where they import them from different countries so they can have them year round. We grow this as it is ready,
Yeah,
and a lot of people don't understand that. They think it's just food.
yeah. I I actually I dated a girl whose family uh paid to go to that kind of place, and
Hmm.
they would go to a grocery store where not even a grocery store, just a shed
Mm.
where they sold you what was in season and what was grown and what was picked that day. And I think that's really cool. And I think that, to your point, would really educate on a smaller scale the community as to where their food comes from, and show them the freshness of it and just how it works more. But it seems like there was a barrier of entry because you had to make a certain amount of money, live in the certain area, and then pay to do it.
Yep.
And I think those kind of things are huge barriers of entry to learning about it.
Right.
So
Yeah, and
That's
that
pretty cool though that
yeah,
you
no,
do that, man.
it's a great approach, and it's definitely a great, it's a great way to engage with the community and get get them interested, like you mentioned. It's obviously our produce is a bit more expensive than you would find in the grocery stores for the same
Oh,
reasons that you brought up.
yeah, of course.
Um, but we're in a constant state of trying to think outside the box and find new ways to innovate, that information, and like, there's been projects, there's been attempts to grow, farms, like small farms, obviously in urban areas like Chicago, and like just
Yeah,
like areas like that to try to bring some literacy, some attention to agriculture on the urban scale, as small as or I guess as large as possible, which is pretty small in an urban area. But like there's been approaches to having inner city kids to have them work on the farm to try to get them away from some like the crime and some of the other issues that would be in their area, and also to bring them awareness of how their food is grown, and then they get to keep all the food that they harvest.
yeah. Well, we have a lot of those. I'm from Philly.
Oh, nice.
So we have a lot of those around here, but you'll never catch me eating a Philadelphia zucchini. I don't, there's something in the air over there. I don't want anything to do with it. But yeah, I think that smaller scale projects like that and combined with social media would really benefit it in the long run. And I don't think that this is something that can be solved overnight. I think that it's something that would have to impact be impacted by infrastructure change and by constant information being given to you and constant involvement with it. So it's kind of a I think that social media, yes, can be used, but there's a lot more that goes into it than that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail right on the head with that one. It's one of those things that if we can at least get the conversation going and then just kind of push until we get a little bit more and then a little bit more and then a little bit more, eventually the ideal would be that we get some kind of infrastructure change that would that would in turn lead to some kind of shift in the education system or shift in the something. Just it's gonna be a long fight, but it's definitely a worthy one, because if we don't do it, then the ramifications of not doing it are a lot worse than the potential problems of working on it.
Oh yeah. But again, you have to a huge hurdle is a lot of people out of sight, out of mind, man. Who
Right.
cares where it comes from? Who I don't want to know.
Right.
Like so it's just there's a lot. It's an uphill battle.
There is. And there's actually been a new approach that's been kind of happening in my area. And I know there's other parts of the country where this has been in effect as well. But there's been new approaches to try to bring agricultural education classes to like elementary, middle schools, try to get them started young.
Yeah.
And kind of having that mindset of like like small gardens for the school that they could work on, and kind of having that very very early relationship with the soil and with the plants and with the animals, try to get them an idea of every step of the food chain and how that food gets developed as they're learning about what even food is. um I think that we're experimenting with a lot of different things right now, and like you mentioned, it's there's not going to be a one size fits all solution for everything, and it's definitely not going to come tomorrow. But it's one of those things that if we if we want it to happen, then we need to keep talking about it. If we kind of just let it, let things run their course, like you mentioned, it's out of sight, out of mind. It's going to get forgotten. We have to keep bringing it up, keep reminding people, keep telling them like, hey, don't forget that we're working on this, and hey, don't forget where your food comes from, and hey, don't forget to, this, that, and the other thing. I mean, the end of my episode, I always say, don't forget to thank a farmer. It's a big part of the conversation is don't, and I'm not saying that because I think that farmers are these like righteous beings that deserve to be thanked for everything they do, but it's the idea of having appreciation for what your things come from, and not just taking for granted what you have in your life.
Yeah. Well, there's a humbleness that comes with that, and we do not emphasize that in our society. So I completely agree though. You would thank anybody. You would thank I thank the trash guys
Yeah.
anytime I see him. I'm like, thanks, dude. I don't want to do it. Thank you. And
Right.
it's just ah ah keep screaming.
Yeah, no, I get it. But
Ah,
that kind
nice.
of, I mean, that kind of ends my monologue. I don't know if you have any more thoughts you wanted to express.
Bro, no, I think I've made a fool of myself enough here.
No, I definitely, I mean, I appreciated your input. You definitely had some solid points, and you kind of made me had to think through some things.
Yeah, well, coming from a complete layman and completely uneducated in it. I mean, I worked on a farm when I was 14 and I dated that girl. So that is my level of expertise. And I live in the city. So
Hey, this entire show is all about trying to get the conversations about agriculture. Excuse me, get the conversations about agriculture into layman's terms. I mean, getting
yeah,
layman on here is that's exactly what I'm looking for. So you're
well,
perfect.
listen to me, dude. Comes from the farm, goes into my mouth. That's all I care about.
All
And
right.
I'm part of the problem, baby.
Hey, well, admitting it's half the battle, right?
Yeah.
But no, I definitely, I appreciate you taking the time to hop on here and kind of let me know your thoughts and, let me know if you think I'm crazy or if I'm wasting my time or anything like that.
Oh no, dude. I'm the crazy one.
Awesome. Well, I think it was a lot of fun. We had a good time here.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks,
like I,
dude.
yeah, like I said, you're, more than welcome to anything else you want to add on here. If you haven't, if we get out of the episode and if you remember something you wanted to talk about, then you're more than welcome to come on for a part 2 or some other
Yeah.
topic of some sort.
That'd be great. I can bring more conspiracies to the table. The moon isn't real. Um, they're listening. And
Awesome.
yeah,
I
cool.
love it.
I mean, yeah.
Cool. So before we close out, you want to just go ahead and remind everybody who you are and where they can find you?
Yeah. I'm Matt from Dumbology. I'm the host and creator of the show, Dumbolgy, the study of being dumb. Um, it's just a comedy show where we kind of just mess around and talk about whatever things that are going on. We actually just released an episode where we did a deep dive in a hip hop album, and it was actually a pretty good episode. We tried to do some intelligent conversation that didn't go so well. So you could catch us on anywhere you get podcasts, iTunes, Instagram, Spotify, TikTok, all the things I just said I hated for the past hour. So thanks again, man, for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, thanks for coming on. And yeah, I'll put all your links down in the description so everyone can check you out. I
Yeah.
actually just listened to your most recent episode, the hip hop one. It was definitely a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, you
Yeah,
did.
I
Oh
did.
Jesus.
So I kind of had an idea of what I was getting myself into, but
Oh good.
no, it was a good time.
Yeah,
So
we talked about Ronald Reagan having mud butt and a couple other things. Cool.
Awesome. So yeah, I definitely appreciate you taking the time to hop on here and talk to me for this time.
Yeah, dude. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So thanks again for joining me, Matt. Thanks to all my listeners for tuning in and for always supporting the show. I hope to catch all you guys next week. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.